We now return to the cold truth, where we have discussed the ignorance governing society and the ignorance behind abortion. A major point of that ignorance is the topic of today's video, the lie that abortion has no long-lasting effect on the female mind or body. If this were true, why would women fight so desperately for the rights to have an abortion to be explicitly spelled out? If women did not know that they were putting their own bodies and minds on the line, they would have no problem doing what women did in the 1800s, going to voodoo priestesses and taking magic potions to kill the offspring. The cold truth is, going to an abortion clinic is a terrifying act that has made many women back out from the process altogether. This is an excerpt from a blog about a woman who first went to an abortion clinic, only to find that it was cold and unfeeling rather than the hospice of warmth she expected. When I first found out I was pregnant, my heart sank. At 25, with a promising career ahead and firm plans for the future, I felt unprepared and overwhelmed. The thought of becoming a mother felt more like an impending storm than the blissful event I had once envisioned. After days of agonizing decisions, I gathered the courage to visit the local abortion clinic, convinced it was my only option. However, the experience that awaited me was anything but what I had expected. As I approached the clinic, a wave of apprehension washed over me. The building, though unassuming, seemed to pulsate with a heavy energy. I could hardly breathe, feeling the weight of their judgment as I crossed the threshold. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and stark, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights. The reception area, lined with pamphlets and the distinct sound of ancient whispers, only heightened my sense of dread. The staff, while professional, seemed rushed, their demeanor adding to my unease. I expected a more comforting environment where I could share my fears and doubts freely, but instead, I felt more like a statistic, another number on their clipboard. When I met with the secretary, I saw her check the boxes. Marital status, single, a painful truth. Sex type, consensual, I wish it hadn't been. Abortion reason, other. Apparently, not wanting a baby counts as other. As I sat in the waiting room, surrounded by women with similar expressions of trepidation, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a decision I was being pushed into, rather than one I was in control of. The reality of what lay ahead began to sink in, and I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. After a long wait, I was finally ushered into a small consulting room. Each question they asked felt like a dagger into my heart. I was pushed deeper into a labyrinth I didn't want to traverse. My heart raced as I contemplated my options and the weight of my decision. I glanced at the brochures, each one filled with information that suddenly felt overwhelming and intimidating. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about terminating a pregnancy. It was about my autonomy, my fears, and the emotional journey that I had hardly begun to navigate. Ultimately, something inside me shifted. The pressure I felt from the clinic and the outside world became too much. It was as if a voice inside me whispered that I needed to step back, to regain control of my body and my choices. In an act of defiance, mixed with self-preservation, I left the clinic that day, not wishing to return. While the decision to not terminate my pregnancy haunted me in the following weeks, I found solace in the fact that I had chosen to listen to my instincts. This experience, though filled with anxiety and uncertainty, taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of owning my choices. While I may not have the answers to all my questions yet, I learned to trust myself in the face of intimidation. I may have left the clinic that day, but the journey to understanding my desires, fears, and future has only just begun, and my daughter will help me along that path. To the people in that clinic and all clinics, of which there are possibly 700 in the US, the girl not getting an abortion meant a loss of revenue. To the girl, it meant choosing to murder her own child or not. Many reports speak of such waiting rooms where unfriendly stares watch and promising propaganda is littered about, detailing meaningless mantras such as, "It's your choice." Unlike other doctors who want to help people and are saddened when they choose not to help themselves, abortion doctors are mostly in it for the money and are saddened to see their fat paycheck get thinner. If you don't believe us, listen to the next testimonial. A repentant ex-abortion doctor who's often attacked and thrice sued blog, we will quote multiple times, has this to offer about his one-time career and his former colleagues. As a former abortion doctor, my journey is both complex and deeply personal. In the early years of my career, like many of my colleagues, I was primarily drawn to the practice by the financial incentives it offered. The demand for abortions was high, and the lucrative fees painted a picture of stability and success. I can't deny that the financial rewards were enticing, and many of the doctors I knew shared this mindset. We were taught to view our work through a lens of convenience and choice, often sidelining the deeper ethical implications of what we were doing. However, that perspective drastically changed when I began to confront the harsh reality of my actions. The turning point in my career came when I attended a seminar that challenged the narratives I had been comfortably accepting. It was during this event that I truly confronted the moral implications of my work. The arguments presented were backed by scientific evidence and emotional testimonies that pierced through my self-imposed psychological barriers. I realized that I was not merely performing a clinical procedure. I was participating in the termination of a potential life. The realization that abortion was, in fact, akin to murder haunted me. It was a shocking revelation that fundamentally altered my perspective on the procedures I had carried out for years. As I began sharing my newfound views with other doctors in the field, I was met with resistance and skepticism. Many of my peers continued to view abortion as a transactional service, dismissing the ethical concerns I raised as mere distractions from their profitable practices. This rift highlighted a disturbing truth. For many abortion providers, financial gain frequently overshadowed the moral debates surrounding abortion. Some saw patients merely as clients. The humanity of their decisions became lost amidst the sterile environment of the operating room. My conviction grew stronger, and I felt compelled to speak out, to change not only my path, but to challenge an industry grounded in profit above all else. Today, I stand firmly against abortion, advocating for the rights of the unborn, and hoping to spark a larger conversation about ethics, choice, and the true cost of our decisions. So, it is clear that many, probably not all, but many, abortion doctors are in the abortion services for the money. They have put their humanity on the side in favor of getting rich. Those who believe they are doing a good thing are the most dangerous members of the conspiracy, those with the power to kill and the belief that they are good. They are criminals who are protected by their right to believe what they will, and we are glad that it is not our responsibility to be their judges in this life or the eternities, as we would find them guilty of genocide. Tonight, abortion doctors who believe you do a service for the world, thank whatever God you worship that he is more merciful than we are. Besides the chilling atmosphere of abortion clinics, which are little more than assassin's guilds with public marquees, there are at least 10 physical, psychological, social, and emotional costs that can befall women for the rest of their natural lives after an abortion, any one of which would be more than enough reason not to just kill the baby, and more than enough evidence that unprotected sex is a gift that keeps on giving. We will mention 4 in this video and 6 in next. 1. The only statistic we should need to prove that abortion has a lasting effect is the suicide rate of women who have had an abortion. Numerous studies that have taken place in the United States, Italy, and Finland, including the widely reputable National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, or ADHEalth, have shown that women who have a single abortion and no other markers have as much as 600% likelihood of committing suicide as women who have not. This is not just right after the abortion, this is for the remainder of their lives. While exact reasonings for suicide are hard to track down, a study in 2022 showed that the suicide rate for women in general is approximately 57 out of every million. For women who have had an abortion, that number increases to 337 out of every million. If that does not sound like a lot to you, you are desensitized. Plus, there are a lot fewer women who have had abortions than women in general. Estimates suggest that out of every 3,000 abortions performed, one woman will commit suicide specifically because of having killed her baby. That means that every 150 minutes, a woman will kill herself because she killed her baby. That's an average of 1 every 2.5 hours, between 9 and 10 a day, and more than 66 each week. That's about 288 each month, and 3,504 a year. The number of women who have not had abortions and who commit suicide every day is about 16.6, or about 6,060 a year. That is a huge number and is unacceptable for society. But note that the number of women who commit suicide who have had an abortion is more than half of the number of women who have not. More than 1/3 of female suicides are due directly to abortion, with a possibly larger number for whom abortion is a factor in suicide. However, women who have had an abortion make up only about 1.6% of all women. That implies an even more staggering number that women who have had an abortion may be as much as 20 times as likely to commit suicide as women who have not. Factoring women who have had multiple abortions, and factoring that number as getting much smaller with each subsequent abortion, comparing the 6 times suicide rate of women who have had one abortion to women who have not, against the 20 times as likely average statistic, that means there is an exponential increase with women who have had multiple abortions of them eventually committing suicide. On average, a woman who has had 2 pregnancies aborted has about 32 times higher chance of committing suicide than a normal woman, with that number increasing to about 130 times with 3, and so forth. That factor is heavily corroborated by many studies, and though the number is hard to pin down exactly, it is very clear that getting a second or later abortion should be even more frowned upon than getting the first one. Truthfully, the suicide statistic is even more dire. Suicide attempts are many times more common than suicide itself, especially in women. Though the overall number of men who complete suicide is 4 times that of women who complete suicide, women may be as much as 8 times as likely to attempt suicide as men. That means that if 1 in 3,000 abortions explicitly leads to completed suicide, about 7 out of 3,000 probably lead to a suicide attempt that does not end in death. That means about 1 every 21.5 minutes, 67 a day, 470 a week, 2,016 a month, and 24,528 a year. Suicide attempts often end up hospitalized and certainly lead to lasting physical and emotional consequences. That's nearly 25,000 women who have had an abortion try to kill themselves each year but cannot complete the suicide for one or more reasons and will now have to suffer for both decisions. Do not try to convince us that it is their body, so it is their choice. Many studies show that suicide is often a crime of passion where the emotions become too much to bear. Even excluding the cases where abortion is not explicitly listed as the reason, abortion definitely disrupts a woman's emotional state enough to the point where it is irresponsible to allow her to make the first choice, since it may very well hamper her ability to make rational, conscious choices later. For those who wonder what the cost of this is in terms of money, the National Institute of Health, using many complicated measures, have determined the cost to the United States of one woman attempting suicide, regardless of the outcome, as approximately $206,000, mostly in opportunity cost. That is not as important by any stretch of the imagination as the life wasted, but to think that the US loses more than most make in a year when a person tries to hurt him or herself may be enough of a reason for the US to stop abortion. The annual cost to the country is well over $50 billion just in post-abortion suicide attempts. That means the average citizen has to pay about $148 a year in taxes to cover abortion-driven suicide attempts. 2. The same study as before has clarified that women who have had an abortion have between a 23% and 26% greater likelihood of other major psychological conditions going forward where they were not present before, including depression and anxiety. Conditions that already existed are thought to be aggravated dramatically, and there is a greater increase in mental hospitalizations for women who have had abortions, percentage-wise, than for women who have not. To paraphrase their study, as quoted by the controversial but well-established Charlotte Lozier Institute, a think tank dedicated to anti-abortion research, the evidence is clear: abortion contributes to mental health problems, at least for some women. For example, a 2016 analysis of data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, ADULT, has shown that each exposure to abortion increases the risk of mental disorders by 23%, even after controlling for 25 other factors, including prior mental health issues. A 2023 study also indicates that pressure to undergo an abortion is associated with poorer mental and emotional outcomes. The American Psychological Association, APA, has acknowledged that these and other risk factors, including lack of support from others, feelings of stigma, pre-existing mental or emotional problems, wanting to keep the pregnancy, and repeat abortion, are associated with more mental health problems following an abortion. These findings have been confirmed by a recent peer-reviewed CLI analysis of state Medicaid data showing that, compared to women who give birth, women who have an abortion in their first pregnancy are 3.4 times more likely to experience an increase in outpatient medical health visits and 5.7 times more likely to experience an increase in inpatient conditions. Similarly, another peer-reviewed CLI study of Medicaid data demonstrates that women with a history of pregnancy loss, including abortion, are approximately 35% more likely to require postpartum mental health treatment following their subsequent first live birth. The National Library of Medicine corroborates this. After extensive adjustment for confounding other pregnancy outcomes and socio-demographic differences, abortion was consistently associated with increased risk of mental health disorder. Overall risk was elevated 45%. Risk of mental health disorder with pregnancy loss was mixed, but also elevated 24% overall. Birth was weakly associated with reduced mental disorders. 1/11 of the prevalence of mental disorders examined over the period were attributable to abortion. The jury is in. For women seeking to use abortion as a means of controlling emotional health, it is not a solution with positive short or long-term effects. 3. The same extremely well-documented study quotes that 2.1% of women who have had abortions will go on to develop an addiction to alcohol, 1.72% will develop an addiction to nicotine, 2.51% will develop an addiction to cannabis, and 3.25% will develop an addiction to other illicit drugs sometime later in their life. This is not including those who have habits from before their pregnancies. The results show what percentage of women who suffer miscarriages, tragic events that often push women to seek comfort from external sources, have addictions to the same substances, and what percentage of women who carry their pregnancy full term have them. The results are almost unilaterally astounding. For women who have lost their baby, for whom our sympathy is utmost and our hearts are lifted up constantly in prayer for you, the percentages who develop addictions to alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, and other drugs are as follows: 0.84%, 1.42%, 1.04%, and 1.2% respectively. These numbers are high and are believed to be associated with grief, but in all cases are lower than those of women who have had an abortion. Alcohol abuse is 2.5 times as likely in women who have had an abortion than in women who have had a miscarriage. Nicotine usage is 1.2 times as likely. Cannabis usage is 3.125 times as likely, and other drug usage is 2.7 times. And that is only for women who have gone through intense, heart-wrenching loss. For women who have had either a successful pregnancy or no pregnancies at all, which give results in this study that are negligibly different. Those numbers are even lower, and the ratio is even higher. The normal woman, so to speak, usage of alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, and other drugs are as follows: 0.47%, 1.66%, 0.73%, and 0.49% respectively. That means women who have had an abortion are, in comparison to women who have not lost a child, 4.47 times as likely to abuse alcohol, 1.04 times for nicotine, 3.44 times for cannabis, and 6.63 times for illegal drugs. While in these statistics, nicotine seems the outlier, even it has a greater chance post-abortion, and all of the many conditions brought on by using these drugs are all more likely in cases for women who have had an abortion. Now, we would like to add a disclaimer to these last 2 points, that women who will have abortions are more likely to have already had addictions and/or serious psychological diseases. One might say this invalidates those numbers because the women who will have abortions already had genetic markers for mental disease and substance abuse before. We claim the opposite, that for women who use abortion as a means of stabilizing mental conditions, they will find that those conditions are exaggerated, especially the temptation to use drugs, cannabis, and alcohol. Women who have a family history of mental disease, including addiction, will want to stay far away from abortion, as its aftermath strongly increases the temptation of substance abuse. As a second disclaimer, even though the numbers may seem relatively low to a world that expects the same statistics from psychology as they would see from physicists and chemists, any trend with people is worth reviewing. The statistic shows that about 1 in 10 pregnant women who have an abortion will eventually develop a habit for one or more substances. This is an explosive statistic that deserves to be on the front page, especially when the numbers compared to women who have either miscarried or had at least one full-term pregnancy, for whom those numbers are about 1 in 22 and 1 in 31. Although multiple addictions are not reported in this study, we can still safely say that risk of substance abuse in post-abortion women is more than 2 times that of post-miscarriage women, and more than 3 times that of post-birth women, which is deserving of as much attention as any scientific discovery, but will continue to be hidden by media because it does not fit their narrative. 4. This one is another that is difficult to prove cause and effect, but it definitely must be stated that the percentage of women who seek abortions is directly proportional to the percentage of women who were, are, or will be in abusive relationships. The correlation is very clearly established. With a small sample, the otherwise reputable PubMed.gov had the following to report. Interviews with 51 consecutive women presenting to the University of North Carolina's abortion clinic over a 2-month period in 1994 confirmed the hypothesis that this population has experienced an above-average incidence of domestic violence. 31.4% of the abortion seekers reported a lifetime history of physical or sexual abuse. 21.6% of these women had been abused in the prior calendar year, and 7.8% had experienced abuse during the current pregnancy, none for the first time. 54.5% of women with self-reported lifetime history of abuse had witnessed domestic violence in their family of origin, and 36.4% had been abused as a child. The interviews further revealed that 70% of abused women had experienced the standard cycle of domestic violence, involving tension building, acute battering, and contrition phases. Although 80% of battered women were aware of community resources, they were unlikely to use them. Prior studies of domestic violence in obstetric populations have identified prevalences of 11 to 24%. Some of this variability is likely attributable to women's reluctance to acknowledge abuse. Overall, these findings indicate that a lifetime or current history of domestic violence should be considered a risk factor for abuse during pregnancy. Regardless of her decision regarding the outcome of the pregnancy, a pregnant woman with such a history should be offered counseling about an exit plan, safety issues, and community resources. First, let us make a statement to husbands and partners. Any abuse of spouse or children is a monstrous crime. You do not own these women or their children. To strike, punch, push, beat, or in other ways damage a woman, especially one to whom you have professed your love, and especially one who is carrying your child, is an abomination. For those who believe in a divine power, know that you will face eternal consequences for your selfish, deplorable actions. For women who are facing abuse, we advise you to seek counseling and make a plan today. It is imperative that you not think you are the guilty party, and that you get out now. Now, as for causation, it is almost impossible to determine whether abuse is the cause of desire to get an abortion, or whether abortion leads to abuse. Either way, it is certainly worth noting that if women in abusive relationships desire abortions, the rate of abuse before abortion and after abortion does not decrease. Studies are clear. Abusive partners do not stop abusing just because the woman kills her child. Other studies have shown with absolute certainty that the number of abused women who are abused in the first trimester of pregnancy does not even decrease 0.1% whether she gets an abortion or not. In fact, rates of abuse if pregnancies are aborted without spousal consent increase by 11.6%. Abuse leads to abuse. Every statistic is very clear about that. Those who witness abuse growing up seem more likely to end up in abusive relationships. While this video is about abortion, not abuse, women and men both need to be aware of the increase of abuse in our society. Women seeking an abortion should question whether abuse is a factor in her relationship, since women who are abused are so much more likely to seek abortion than women who are not. Remember that this sample reported that not a single woman was abused after getting pregnant who was not abused beforehand. That certainly does not mean it does not happen, but it does mean that abused women need to get out of abusive relationships before they find themselves pregnant with a child they will come to regret. Seeing an end of abuse will see a dramatic decrease in the murder of innocents. It is also clear that ending abortion will decrease abuse, especially sexual abuse, in part because men will have a greater need to be responsible for their actions. For the sake of time, we have to cut this here, but we will explain the second half of this point in the next segment. The cold truth is unbending.